We have got an interesting one today. So I'm here at Todd Lake and I'm doing a 13.5 mile hike to No Name Lake and Bend Glacier. This is arguably one of my very favorite hikes in all of Central Oregon. Starting at 6,100 feet where we're at now, going up to about 8,200 feet. No Name Lake is about 8,000 feet. No Name Lake is my favorite alpine lake in all of Central Oregon. It's absolutely beautiful. Today is October 12th, 2022. Last week or two until the end of the season. It's a bit chilly right now. It's probably about high 30s, we'll say. I definitely feel it in my fingers because I don't have gloves on currently. It's around 7 a.m., just after sunrise, which is about 10 minutes ago. Could be a bit of a long hike with a 13.5 miles, about 2,600 foot elevation gain. That's the harder part out of those two statistics. Be hiking in Deschutes National Forest today and Three Sisters Wilderness, my favorite wilderness area in all of Oregon. So it's kind of interesting. You start at a parking lot next to Todd Lake. We haven't really officially gotten on the trail yet. This is just a few tenth little section that takes us to Todd Lake. We're going to be staying to the right of Todd Lake, getting on the trailhead. And that's the trail that takes us to No Name Lake and Broken Top. No Name Lake is a little cirque, Alpine Cirque, kind of at the top in a little nook and cranny of Broken Top. And here's a sign, Todd Lake. It's a very cool lake at 6,150. Stop and give you that information. If you want to read it, you can pause it. There's a restroom over there. Good to know. If we were doing Todd Lake, we'd be going straight ahead. Todd Lake's just a short little flat loop that a lot of people like to hike if they just want a short trip. This is what we are taking. Todd Trail, number 34. Junction Soda Creek Trail, Junction Broken Top Trail, Green Lakes. We're not going to Green Lakes. I do have videos of that available. We are staying to the right and going all the way to No Name Lake. Let's do it. So this section is more of an ascension. So we parked at Todd Lake. I'll advise that the actual road itself, pretty bumpy once you get off Cascade Scenic Byway. Most cars should be able to handle it though, but be advised there's a couple tenths of bumpiness. Then we walked a couple tenths to Todd Lake, hung a right at the bathroom. Started this a little after sunrise, about 10 minutes after sunrise. This is a permitted hike. I've got my permit in my pocket. Very much in for a treat today, specifically for the top portion. No Name Lake is my favorite alpine lake, Central Oregon. It's tucked into the Cirque of Broken Top. This is one of my favorite mountains in Central Oregon. You're getting a theme. We're still in the early sections of ascending beyond Todd Lake in our 13.5 mile out and back to No Name Lake and Bend Glacier and Broken Top. 2,600 foot elevation gain. This is one of those hikes where I appreciate every step of it. A beautiful alpine forest, a lot of interesting, ecologically diverse zones we'll be exploring on this hike as we ascend 2,600 feet. So, my opinion is there's probably a 2 to 2.5 month golden window for alpine adventuring. Starting either August 1st or August 15th, typically in that range, and going to around October 15th, some years maybe a week after that, before the snow starts. So that is the golden alpine window, where you can kind of do the most premium hikes in Central Oregon, get way up at elevation. Saving October 12th, I am doing one of my very favorite hikes, as I mentioned. Kind of crazy if you think about it. A couple weeks from now, this area will start its annual Snowmageddon process, and it will literally be inaccessible, I should say, by humans for 10 months, so next August. So it's a magical couple month window, and if you're a wilderness adventure alpine lover like myself, you want to take advantage of this window. I would even say that I reverse engineer my entire annual hiking calendar just to maximize this 2.5 month window. I want to do all the alpine hiking adventures in this window, so I do other hikes like river hikes at lower elevation, end of winter, spring, kind of start building my calendar out that way. But this is definitely the premium window. We get to see the most beauty. My viewpoint is, if you're into wilderness adventuring, develop a love and appreciation for the forest. If you do that, every step of a hike like this is magic. This life is a journey, not a destination. I'm personally not a fan, not to turn negative, but of the destination hike mentality. I know some people will do a hike just to get to that end point that is the money shot, but if you don't enjoy the hike itself and you're only doing it for the end point, I personally don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. But if you enjoy every step, then the end point's the cherry on top rather than the whole reason you're doing it. If you buy into that mentality, then you're in alpine bliss from the moment you start. So that is definitely my ilk, how I approach it. I think in today's hyper technological society, which is not a bad thing, but I think it's very easy to feel discombobulated, a little disconnection with nature. I strongly recommend, urge anybody, if you ever feel a little out of balance or out of sync with life, listen to your instincts, and maybe you need a little bit more nature. I've made a real effort the last few years to recalibrate my life, moved to Central Oregon, bought a house, and now I explored nature regularly, and I can say for me it was a recalibration that kind of changed my perspective on life. So if you can, no matter where you live, there's probably some sort of nature trail somewhere. Go out and experience nature. It's funny, I've read a few books from sociologists on how humans do in what could be called like asphalt jungles of massive urban cities. And I think you can make a pretty compelling scientific and sociological argument that human beings might not really have been intended to live in 10, 20 million person metropolises. If you look at the number of relationships our brains are designed to actually manage. I think we're meant to be a lot more smaller and more local. I think we have a natural spacing that we're comfortable with, kind of organically. I think you have a baseline stress that you don't even appreciate because you adapt to it when you live in an urban environment, just because the quantity of people stacked on top of each other, number of permutations, is too much for our brains to handle as far as interactions. So the coefficient impact on that is a baseline level of stress that we just adjust to because that's what we do. We're adaptive human beings. As soon as you extricate yourself from an environment like that, you don't realize, until you do that, you don't realize the toll that was taking on you until you remove the variable dynamic. Suddenly you realize that it was having a much more negative impact on you than you realized. So if you can move, or a smaller town with more space, bigger property, less people, so I think it's hard to argue it's not a net positive for your mental, psychological, emotional health, and physical health, frankly. I think the more you can interact with nature, probably the better off you are. You're going to recalibrate your internal balance, be more of a complete and whole person. So I strongly recommend that. It's kind of funny, I don't know if you've ever heard somebody talk about their sea legs. Like you get on a boat, initially you might feel a little nauseous, then you kind of adapt and suddenly you no longer feel nauseous, acclimate to the boat. I think the same concept holds for hiking. When I first got here, I was doing a bit of an incline, and it was a little tiring because I think I was kind of warming up, but blood starts circulating, your heart starts pumping, and you kind of acclimate to the exertion level, and all of a sudden you get in a sweet spot and kind of feel like you're an autopilot all of a sudden. But I think you gotta, I don't know, I'm sure I'm not the first person to make that observation. Maybe that's got a name, but it's just a hiker's acclimation. I could feel it in real time as I was rambling. Now I'm feeling in the groove. Minor little, a lot of times I want to call these creek crossings, but I feel like that's almost an overstatement. I mean, it's probably technically correct, and I do like to be technically correct, but I feel like trickle crossing is more apropos. When I think of a creek, I think of something a little bit more raging than that. Not quite a river, but a creek. If you're an alpine adventurer, you come across innumerable little water features like that. Do I really want to call each and every one of them a creek? I don't know. It feels over the top to say it's a creek, but oh, this is such a beautiful area. I've done this hike, I don't know, I don't really keep track of how many times I do hikes, but I want to say 4 or 5 times. So this is definitely not my first time. I've got one of those minds that I memorize hikes pretty easily. I have a mapping mind, so typically I do, I guess you'd call it like a photographic mind or partial photographic mind. If I do a hike once, I kind of have it locked in my brain. If I'm sitting at home, I can kind of do the whole hike in my head. I wouldn't say with the vividness of every blade of grass, but I just memorized the whole thing. So I do remember this, but it doesn't detract from the beauty whatsoever. Got what I like to call the Alpine mix, the Alpine 3 spruces, mountain hemlock, and of course, probably the most prominent in this area, pine. My 3 favorite type of trees. I've got several pine and blue spruce on my property. I think I want to add more, actually. I'll do a project for 2023. Expand my tree footprint. But I'm very biased. I really like the Alpine mix. I grew up in Portland, so I'm less excited about maybe Douglas firs. Maybe not a fair bias because they are a beautiful tree, but they're so ubiquitous to me, having grown up with them my whole life, that they don't do much for me, but the Alpine mix do. So definitely going to add more on my property. I like this almost kind of sandy gray trail. These pines, very quintessential for Three Sisters Wilderness. See a lot of this over at Green Lakes, far west. I do actually have a full video series on Green Lakes you can check out as I explore the greatest hikes in America and Canada. There's a sign for Three Sisters Wilderness as we cross the threshold.